Greetings to my viewers. I'm György Szőnyi, a photo enthusiast from Szeged, Hungary. I'm continuing with this video on my previous experiments with the OM system camera and especially different programs which can be used for RAW conversion. I have to start with a remark that actually this experiment was inspired by one of the recent videos by Thomas Eisel, who is giving really expert and very convincing opinions about the usage of digital cameras, including the OM system OM1. And recently he argued that it is better, more economic, and eventually more superior to use so-called primary RAW conversion programs which are developed by the manufacturers of the cameras rather than third-party RAW conversion programs, which are obviously very common and very popular among most of the users. Now it intrigued me what he said, and I decided to make some experiments developing parallel RAW conversions with the native OM-Workspace program developed by Olympus and then continued by the OM system, and at the same time with my favorite RAW conversion program, which is DxO, Photolab. I've been using Photolab for quite a while, starting with the version 3. Now we are in version 6. And ever since, I always bought the upgrade, so I have the newest version. And honestly speaking, I was not really aware of OM-Workspace, especially that I had been using DxO Photolab way before that when I used different cameras, Lumix cameras, and I never used the native program for Panasonic either. Now what you are going to see on these pictures that I converted the RAW images, some selected and in some ways problematic RAW images, first with OM-Workspace, then with DxO Photolab6, compare them, then I make some post-production touching up, usually and mostly using an old Photoshop, which I still have. It's the CS6. I've never gone on the installment plan of Adobe because I didn't like the idea. So anyway, in CS6 Photoshop, I can have access to the Nik collection, and I very, very much like the Nik collection, the different filters and different devices in that. So I use both of them for these primary RAW conversions. And then finally, I would like to demonstrate something very interesting, and this is with Topaz's Gigapixel. Recently, I figured out that if I use a one-to-one magnification with Gigapixel, that is, I'm not really increasing the pixel numbers, just use different functions of the program for a one-to-one conversion, the image will be further cleared from noise. And of course, that's one of the major things in the Micro Four Thirds system, that especially in low light, there's too much noise compared with the full frame cameras. So Gigapixel can perfectly clean noise and also makes the images sharper, much sharper. Now, in a private conversation, correspondence, Thomas Eisel mentioned something which is absolutely true, and I subscribe to that, that when you use artificial intelligence for whatever manipulation, especially sharpening, it is like when a painter paints a new layer on the original painting, so it's completely repainted in a way, in a new layer. However, it may be good. So I will trust it to my viewers to look at the sample pictures, watch when I do pixel peeping, magnifying them into 150 or 200%, and simply everybody should decide for him or herself whether they want a super sharp, somewhat slightly artificial image, which in the entirety, I mean in full size, not really visible, but still it gives a feeling of crispness, or it's better to go and just stick to the original native converted raw files. Thank you very much for your attention in advance. Very soon I get to the pictures, and of course I remain very, very curious about opinions, remarks, and developing a discussion in this area. So let's see the pictures. As usually, I look at the pictures in the FastStone image viewer program, which I mentioned I like very much. And I've chosen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 images for demonstration. Each of them were taken by the OM1 camera, and I edited them first in OM-Workspace, then in DxO Photolab, and then I made further tweaks with them. The 4 pictures, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pictures are actually showing different problems, different difficulties. 2 of them are 200 ISO, this flower and the bathroom scene. 2 of them are 1250 ISO, this building and this evening picture in heavy fog, while this last one, which is a night garden scene, is 6400 ISO. So you will be able to see how these programs work with different ISO settings. Let's start with the easiest one, and this is the flower. Here is the raw image, and when I switch on OM-Workspace, here you can see the layout of OM-Workspace, which I'm not going to show you how it works and not going to explain it because Thomas Eisel promised to make tutorial videos on this program. Here you can see a number of different options which you can set, even overriding the kind of automatic settings of the program. And finally, you go to export, and in the export function also you can do certain things. I mean, you can decide about the size, whether you want to resize or not. You can give a special name to that. And finally, also you have different formats to save the image, JPEG and TIFF, with EXIF or without EXIF. And finally you hit export, and here a meter shows how quickly the conversion goes, and it was very, very quick. In a few seconds actually it is already done. So that was one way of doing that, and the other one is the DxO Photolab. In DxO Photolab, here are the different versions of the pictures which I'm going to show to you, and this will be the DxO Photolab6 version. Again, there are many possibilities of tweaking and setting, but I don't want to spend the time with that. Let's quickly look at it, what we have. So this would be the workspace version, which I call base, and here is the DxO version. And if we compare them, we don't see major differences, especially if you look at the petals of the flower. Both of them are very smooth, very nice. The central parts are sharp enough. This is what we get in the first round. But of course you can still work on them. And one particular thing which I discovered recently is the Gigapixel enhancement, in such a way that I don't really magnify the pictures, keep them a 1-to-1 scaling, and still very efficient noise reduction as well as very efficient sharpening happens on these pictures. So these are the gigapixel versions, and if you compare them again, you see them quite similar to each other. It would be for me quite difficult to choose which one is better. Maybe the workspace origin is a bit smoother, and of course on the DxO based version you can see certain, I wouldn't call them artifacts, certain sharpening which turns them a little bit more graphic looking than natural photograph. If we move to the next picture, that's a bit more difficult, although it's also 200 ISO, so there isn't much noise in that. If you zoom on it, well, there is some noise, but it's pretty okay. The greatest problem was the light, that this is some artificial light, and it distorted the white balance, in my opinion, or according to my taste. And also this kind of slanting is pretty bad, which should be corrected. Now, I didn't manage to do either of these problems, to correct either of these problems perfectly in Workspace. There are various ways of using keystoning and distortion and this and that, but I couldn't really bring them into straight. And also, although I changed on the white balance, but I didn't manage to bring the white balance to a state which would be satisfactory to me. This is the best I could make in Workspace, and here is the version I produced in Photolab. If we compare, again, it's a matter of taste, of course, but to me the Photolab version is much nicer, much more pleasing without this greenish tint which I had there. An important point is to look at the script. Of course, this is very, very small, so it needs a huge magnification. You see it's 150, and I would say that they are quite similar to each other. Also, the noise problems are similar. However, the DxO version is a bit sharper here in the mirror image than the native one. And then I put both of them into Photoshop. In combination with Photoshop and the Nik collection, I could definitely enhance both images. You can see here, for example, the slanting is corrected more or less. I was working on a mirror image which was much less visible in the original or the first conversion images. And if we go to magnification, it's again more or less the same situation. The DxO origin is a bit more sharp, a bit sharper, and has a bit more details and structure than the other one, but they are comparable to each other. And the same thing will happen if we put them through Gigapixel. Don't forget that this is a 1-to-1 magnification, and this is what we get. Certain surfaces are definitely rougher, more structured, for example the tires, than here, and again you will have to decide for yourself which one you prefer. Let's not talk about the white balance, because that's also possible to change more. But the lettering, the alphabets, are quite nicely coming through both Gigapixel versions. You remember that last time in my last video I mentioned that Gigapixel has the greatest problems with texts when has to convert texts up, but in this case I would say that it's a fairly decent job. And that's all. So that was 200 ISO, but let's move up and see this building. The building is 1250 ISO. It was in daylight, but it was backlit. So this is the shady side of the building, and the sky was quite light behind it. Now on the raw, you can see that the sky is pretty good. It has a lot of details and not too much noise, but there is definitely quite a lot of noise on the building itself, especially those parts which are through a dark glass. And I'm offering in your attention this chair, which will appear in the different versions, and we'll see how the chair becomes more and more enhanced. Okay, let's quickly compare the OM-Workspace origin base picture and the DxO Photolab version using the DeepX noise reduction. Here you are. So these are the non-manipulated versions, yes, after the raw conversion. And I must tell you that the DxO seems to be much sharper and much more detailed than the pretty blurred and hazy Workspace version. Especially you can see it on these leaves and on the chair as well. The DxO version was made by the help of the DeepX very aggressive noise reduction, but I also put up the noise reduction in Workspace, which now has a new module in the newest version, and it warns the users that there's a strong noise reduction built into that, and also needs a very fast processor or even more graphics card to achieve those results. Okay. Next version will be the tweaking, so not really making the pictures any bigger. Actually, these are reduced sizes. You can see the original was 5200 on the longest side, and for some reason I made it shorter. That's actually my usual habit when there are average photographs with which I don't have any special purpose, that I usually reduce them to 3333 on the longer side. But with the Nick collection I worked on them, and everything becomes a bit more enhanced. I use the tonal settings in among the Nick collection filters, and you can see that there's a much greater tonal kind of sharpness or whatever on the DxO version, while the Workspace is not so clear. Maybe the stones here are a bit overdone, you could argue, but when it comes to the chair, certainly here you can see the chair much better than on the Workspace, and there's also much less noise, I would argue. And finally, the Gigapixel versions, it's more or less the same result, but even more emphasized. The differences are even more emphasized. Again, let's observe the difference. Well, this is 300% magnification, so it's better to go back to 150, and you can see that the details are nicer, although sometimes I admit a little artificial on the DxO version enhanced by or through Gigapixel. Again, here is the difference with the chair. Now let's move to higher ISO, and this is the evening shot with heavy fog, which again was shot with 1250 ISO. Visibility was not very good, but it was a rather exciting kind of scene with the lamp and with the darkening blue sky in the background. If you magnify it, there is a significant amount of noise, and you have to do something with that. Let's see first what the OM-Workspace achieved. This is the OM-Workspace, and I would say that it's not so bad. Noise reduction is pretty good, also on the sky, and you have details, but to me these details are not really enough, especially on this gate and the bricks. When we compare it to the DxO version, you will see that it will be much nicer, at least in my opinion. Bricks, the gate, these leaves, the dry leaves on the tree. It was winter time in November, late November or mid-November. So if we compare these two, I would say that clearly the DxO version is the winner. You see the gate, everything else, this windowsill. An interesting question is the light, and I'm not sure which rendering of the lamp is better, but it seems to me that in the DxO version there's a little bit more details. You can see the shape of the lamp, while here practically not much or nothing. The final version is the Gigapixel enhancing of these pictures. So let's make the comparison. This was the base image through Gigapixel, and this is the DxO origin image through Gigapixel. And if we compare the two, what we see that Gigapixel quite nicely sharpened the bricks here compared with the previous version, while here it is a significant sharpening and structuring. The gate is still, I would say, much better on the DxO version. Also the leaves, somehow I see more details here than here, and especially on the other side when everything is in the dark, and here you can see very nicely enhanced parts. And if we move to the lamp, what we can see that there's not really much change. Here you still cannot see the lamp, while here better and better you can see the shape of the lamp, and also this lower part of the lamp post is in my opinion nicer and better. As for noise, I don't see any major problem with the noise on either pictures, but perhaps there's a little bit of less noise on the DxO version, and definitely it looks a little bit more graphic if you very aggressively magnify it. Let's see the comparison between the Gigapixel and the non-Gigapixel version of the DxO images. How much does the magnification changes on the same image using Gigapixel? You really have to magnify a lot to feel the changes, but in the end there is a sharpening. There is quite an important sharpening. Look at, for example, compare these two windows, and unfortunately on the Workspace origin that window is completely blurred. Same thing about the door, while I admit again here the door is a little bit too graphic, and you cannot really see exactly the winding of the original iron gate. So again, it's up to you to decide, but the experiment is interesting. And finally, very quickly, the last one. Original image is 6400, very noisy, as you can see, and also there's a little bit of slanting of the building, so it would be nice to employ some keystoning on that. And I would like to call your attention to this lower part of the image, which will be completely missing from the OM-Workspace version when it's converted to JPEG, and I cannot explain why. I tried everything, keystoning, everything to have the full image converted, and it crops. I don't know why OM-Workspace crops, but perhaps Thomas will be able to give some sort of explanation. So here is the OM-Workspace version. We are happy to see that the noise is pretty well muted. but the picture is very blurry. If you look at this walkway here, and at the bottom of the picture, the whole lower part of that inside little fence and the structure of this building is missing, unfortunately. And also I was not able with the keystoning to straighten better the building. Of course, it's not necessary to straighten it entirely, but at least a bit. Here you have the DxO version, which again has done a very good noise reduction job, maybe a little less than OM-Workspace, God knows why, but the details are spectacular. You can see all the little details, the walkway, around the lamps, the leaves on the trees, and fortunately we have this metallic fence which is cropped from the other one. I did use some sort of keystoning in DxO because it has a very good module for keystoning, but I didn't want to aggressively do it, so the kind of straightening entirely the whole picture, I mean the whole building on the picture. What else do we have? We have a Gigapixel version, and that will be interesting to compare. So once again, this is OM-Workspace, rather faded, and I can't explain the crop at the bottom. And this is the DxO Plus Gigapixel version. And if we have a look at the details, well, the general impression, I would say that clearly the DxO is better. And when we go to the details, it will be even more obvious. So with 100%, compare these trees on the hillside. The leaves here. Also very interestingly, somehow this image got smaller in spite of the no crop than this one. And again, I can't explain this. I try to be very careful with no cropping anywhere. And it's also interesting that the larger pixel size achieved a smaller file size than here, which again is a kind of a question for me. But if we continue with the details, have a look at the walkway. What a difference. This fire hydrant, the leaves here, and if we look at this railing, I guess this is some sort of a tennis net or a badminton net. And if you look at the wall, the details, the structures of the wall. So to me, with high ISO pictures, using the noise reduction system of DxO Photolab6, I think it brings a much more superior result than the OM-Workspace. But let's hear others about it. First of all, I'm very grateful for your attention. If you bore with me with such a lengthy video, and I'm very curious about reactions, comments, debates, and let's keep the conversation moving on. Thank you very much once again. So far, so long.